My name is Kat Doyle, and one of the blessings or the joys that I get from the job that I do is that it's very broad. And I want to take just a minute so that you understand a little bit more about how the Archdiocese is situated. So when you're looking for support, you know how we can support you and who can support you. So we have recently, the Archbishop got together with a group of us since they had published the pastoral plan. And the pastoral plan talks about learn your faith, live your faith, and then spread your faith. And so that live your faith, there were some offices that were kind of out there, but we weren't really connected very well, that allowed and helped and supported the people of the Archdiocese in living their faith. So it was Justice and Peace Ministries, which I'm the director. Then there's the Respect Life Ministries. And that is Brendan, who I believe was just here recently, and Brendan Dudley was just here and did a talk here for you as well. Then we have Disabilities Ministries, and I know you're familiar with Maggie Rousseau. She works a lot with the Deaf Ministries, and Kathy Dakin is also here working with your parish a lot on that. And then finally, there's a ministry that not everybody's aware we have, but we do have a deacon that oversees our prison and jail ministry. In prison and jail ministry, we've done a death penalty presentation here for you before, but one of the things that Deacon Dick Tolcher mostly does is he's responsible for making sure there are clergy who are visiting the prisoner. So making sure that they're able to talk with them and able to receive the sacraments while they're in prison or incarcerated. So I wanted you to kind of know those four came together, and by coming together under the office of the Life, Dignity, and Justice, because all four of those ministries are all about life, dignity, and justice. So that's a little bit of a change. We've all been doing the work for a long time, so the only thing that's changed is kind of how we're organized. So I wanted you to know that if you're ever calling up and trying to find us, now you have multiple ways to kind of track us down. I appreciate you bringing up that this summer I had the opportunity. I sit on the board of it's called the Roundtable of Catholic Social Action Directors. It's people just like me across the diocese, and every year we put on a Social Action Summer Institute. And how fortuitous that Pope came out with this wonderful encyclical that allowed us to focus on care for creation as our Summer Institute topic this year. So it gave us kind of almost as soon as it came out, we were right there with a number of bishops, a number of priests, a number of people, theologians, Catholic theologians, who teach on this subject. So we spent a whole week getting to really just learn about what it was the Pope was trying to tell us, what he wanted, the message he wanted to give us. So I want to ask a question before I go any further, because I want to make sure that I address this group correctly. So let's start with this. How many of you have read the encyclical Laudato Si? Okay, so maybe half. How many of you have heard of the encyclical Laudato Si? Good. I actually have been someplace where now it was an ecumenical crowd, but some of them had not heard of that. I think then what I'll do, I'll ask one more question. How many of you have done some more in-depth research and learning and reading on the encyclical? Okay, couple. I'm going to keep this maybe a little bit more basic tonight, but I'm going to encourage you to make sure that you find the time somewhere. I know you guys are offering an extended course to dig deeper into this document and really get into the meat of it. But if not, I would tell you, dig a little deeper into this, because the first thing that it's going to do is challenge you. This is probably one of the most challenging encyclicals that we've seen in a number of years. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. Laudato Si, mi Signore. That's how the Pope opened this encyclical. Praise be to you, my Lord. And these are words that he took from St. Francis's canticle, that canticle that says that our home is a common home, that we need to look at things as our home being the sister with whom we share a life, and the mother who opens her arms to embrace us. So what a wonderful way for our Pope to actually open up what he wanted to talk to us. before we talk about the actual encyclical itself, let's talk a little bit about encyclicals. Because one of the things a lot of people ask me is kind of like, okay, so what's an encyclical and how authentic is the teaching and what if I disagree and all that? So let's start with the fact that the modern Catholic Church, the papal encyclical, that's what this is, and papal encyclical is actually a teaching letter. It's meant to teach us something. And it's sent down from the Pope, and it's either addressed to specific bishops, like the bishops of France, or the bishops of the United States, or it's addressed to the bishops at large, the bishops across the globe. There are different ways that they do that. And the form that it takes and the tone that it takes really depends upon what the topic is, and it also depends upon who the Pope is and how they write and their way of doing things. Now, originally, when you heard the term encyclical, what it meant was a circulating letter. So the Pope or a cardinal might write a teaching letter and give it to one community, and they would learn about it, and that community then would pass it on to the next. So the papal encyclical has been around a long time, that circulating letter. In 1740, Pope Benedict XIV wrote a letter which is generally regarded as the first modern encyclical. And in that one, he kind of set the precedent. So typically the encyclicals are written in the Latin language, and they usually take their name from the first few words. So when you look at your Laudato Si, that's actually how this starts. Laudato Si, mi Signore. That's why it has that name. Now, on Care for Our Common Home is the theme, but the Latin name of the encyclical is how it will be referred to if you need to go look for it on the website or anything like that. It's also interesting that in recent times, the encyclical has been used for significant issues. And most recently, if you look, starting with we'll go all the way to St. John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, it really was used for social issues. But we can go all the way back to Pope Leo because he wrote the first encyclical in terms of social issues, Rerum Novarum. So when we look at all of this, there's a little bit of a difference between an encyclical and an apostolic constitution. That's the highest teaching that comes out from the Pope, an apostolic constitution. And with that one, the archives in the Vatican have said there are papal encyclicals that are apostolic exhortations. That's kind of a hybrid of the teaching letter coming out, but absolutely full on, this is the highest Catholic teaching that there is, and you take this, and there's really not a lot of arguing with it. The informal term of encyclical indicates usually a broad audience. And this one, what's really neat about this one is that this was not, it was addressed to the bishops of the world. It has to do with the welfare of the church at large. But what's really neat about it is he actually wrote this for everyone on this planet, not just the popes, not just the Catholic Church. This was written to address an issue that's important to everybody, no matter what their faith tradition is. Now, it's not that hasn't been done before, but he did this really well. And not only that, and when I say he, the Pope, because of the way that Pope Francis is, who he is, and the media that he uses and all that, this is really the first time that we've seen an encyclical like this embraced by the ecumenical church, by the interfaith church, not just Christians, but those of most of the faith traditions have taken this document and said, you know what, this is a great document, and we're going to use this to teach within our faith tradition as well. That's pretty cool. In my opinion, I think that's pretty neat. I want to tell you that while encyclicals, typically when you read them, it's like, this is what the church teaches. This is not indisputable church teaching. And that's kind of the beauty of this encyclical too, and why the Pope has used the word dialogue so much. He recognizes that this is a challenge. He recognizes that this document is one of those that It's not going to sit comfortably with almost anybody because it's so broad and it addresses something that either we haven't really thought about or it's easy to think about and say, that's not my fault. I can't do anything about that. So he's really going to challenge us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I just wanted you to see that since Leo the 13th, there have been a lot of encyclicals put out there. And they can range anywhere from social issues to talking to a specific group of bishops about how he wants them to do things in their diocese or in their country. So it isn't just teaching to us. Sometimes it's teaching to the magisterium. It's teaching to the bishops and the cardinals and the priests on how to do their work. The other thing I want to talk to you about is that here's a part. It's number 14 in Laudato Si. It says, I urgently appeal for a new dialogue about how we're shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concerns and affects us all. The issue with this, when he's talking about we have a dialogue that we need to engage in, but it's a difficult subject. So I want to spend, if you'll bear with me, just a minute here talking about how you deal with difficult dialogues. And I'll read this because some of you may not be able to see it, but really there's debate and there's dialogue. And we really encourage, and the Pope absolutely encourages dialogue versus debate. So here's the difference. In debate, you want to win the argument. You want to affirm everyone else's, when you look at their views and their opinions, you want to win. You want to be the one whose views and opinions are right. On dialogue, we understand that there are different perspectives and that we learn because people have different views. So we're open to listening and seeing, there is another way to think about it. The other thing in a debate, we listen to others and what they have to say because we're looking for the flaws. We're looking, how can we start the argument? And I'm guilty. I'm going to sit here and tell you, all this stuff sounds good. I'm guilty of this. How many of us listen to a homily and just wait for Father to say something, go, no, I don't agree with that. That's just wrong. I mean, I'll tell you, I do that. In dialogue, we listen to others and how their experiences have shaped their beliefs, because our beliefs and our values are all shaped by our experiences. In debate, we critique the experience of others as invalid or untrue or distorted, whereas in dialogue, we accept the experience of others as real and valid, because if you've seen the movie where it looks at what happened from all the different viewpoints, vantage point, and you look at that, that's how we live our lives. And the way somebody in a developing country sees something will be very different than the way we see something. The way that we've been raised, the household we've been raised in, the way that our family interacts, even the parish that we go to, we see things differently. Our priests, God love them, they don't all agree on everything. So you're going to get a little bit of their flavor. And if you have diocesan priests and you have order priests, again, a really different view and culture. So understand that dialogue starts with the fact that everybody has experiences and your experiences are valid. It's not my job to invalidate what you've experienced so I can win the argument. Also in debate, we speak based on assumptions made about others' motivations especially. I assume that you're saying what you're saying because, and if it's not what I agree, because you disagree with me, because you're bad, because you don't know anything, you haven't been well informed. So we make assumptions about and what motivates somebody. Oh, they have an agenda. How many of us hear that? Oh, you just have an agenda. That's why you think that way. How many of us say that? Oh, they're speaking with a hidden agenda. When we look at dialogue, we look that we speak based primarily on our own understanding and experience. We use the I term. I experience this, not you think that. Debate, we oppose each other and attempt to prove each other wrong. It's one of the things that drives me crazy about Sunday morning television. When you watch the news shows, it doesn't matter which one you watch. They get on there and the whole thing is, I'm right, no, I'm right. And they talk over top each other. And the whole idea is to prove they're wrong and I'm right. That's debate. Now, that's part of what the news shows do. They don't tell you that they're dialoguing. They'll tell you they're debating the issues. But in dialogue, we work together towards common understanding. So I listen to what you say, you listen to what I say, and we contemplate and we discern and we think about how can we come together. In working with my elected official, that's one of the things that over the course of a number of years, we went round and round and pretty much didn't agree in any way, shape, or form on immigration. I was visiting with him in Washington, up on the Hill, and he'd come out of a committee meeting to meet with me. And one of the things we did, because we did not debate, we dialogued. And we sat and talked, and it's when all the unaccompanied minors were coming over. And I said to him, so I'm just wondering, what do you think about all these unaccompanied minors coming over? And he said, I think we ought to put them all on a C-130, take them right back to where they came from, drop them off and come home. I went, really? And I said, don't you think that might be just a little irresponsible? And he goes, well, Kat, I can always depend on you to tell me what you think. And I said, well, as with you, the two of us had that kind of thing. But we didn't stop there and start arguing about the fact that we had totally different opinions. Instead, we kept going. And what we found in dialoguing is we both really wanted something done about the push factors, what was pushing those children. So when he said, oh, I'll be all about appropriating money to put out in that other country to figure out how do we keep them there, I said, great. Does that mean I can go back and tell people that you will support appropriations to go into those countries to deal with the push factors? He said, absolutely. For the first time in a number of years, we came to a common understanding and agreement. Might have been for different reasons, but it's because we dialogued and didn't debate on the topic. I'm telling you this story because when you talk to friends and neighbors and even family members about this document, try to stay on the dialogue path. The last one says, strong emotions like anger are used to intimidate others. You start getting angry, and I know if you're anything like me, I'll sit down and say, okay, let's talk about something else. Whereas dialogue, strong emotions like anger and sadness are actually used to convey the intensity of how we feel in our experience. So we don't use it to manipulate, and we don't use it to intimidate. We use it to really get our story and our message across so that people understand where we're coming from. And I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I need you to know that as we go forward on this, and as you go forward and talk to people, because I can tell you, I'm out there talking to people all the time about this, and it's a challenge. So try to stick to dialogue. Try to remember these sort of things when you're doing that. This is just really quick as you move into some of the talks that you're going to have, whether it's this or anything else. Listen carefully. Don't listen to find where you're going to disagree. Listen to find where you're going to agree on something. Use I statements. In other words, take responsibility for you, not for somebody else. Let everybody participate. It's really hard for me sometimes to shut my mouth and let somebody give me their opinion on this document, especially when they're not Catholic and don't have any idea what Catholic social teaching is. And I have to really bite my tongue and let them have their say. Because if you don't let them have their say about it, then all you're doing is lecturing to them. You're not having a discussion, and you're not learning from each other. Stay on topic. Stay focused on what the message is, and we're gonna do that here in just a second. And be respectful and charitable. There are times when I literally have to say, at this point, we'll just agree to disagree. You're still my friend. We can still talk about it, but on this particular point, I just. If this goes any further, it's going to start breaking down, and that's not going to be productive, and it's not going to really help us in any way. I think this is kind of cool that when this came out, everybody got really, really excited. Okay, there's a new encyclical coming out. But Pope John Paul II wrote The Ecological Crisis, A Common Responsibility, and he wrote that in 1989. Okay, this is 2015. In 1989, and in a response to what he wrote, the U.S. bishops said he wrote in that ecological crisis, faced with the widespread destruction of the environment, people everywhere are coming to understand that we cannot continue to use the goods of the earth as we have in the past. A new ecological awareness is beginning to emerge. And the ecological crisis is a moral issue. That was 1989. And so the U.S. bishops came out with they're renewing the earth, and that's an invitation to reflection and action on the environment in light of Catholic social teaching. So what's really nice about these two documents, if you get the chance to read these because it sets you up perfectly to dive into Laudato Si. So this is not a new thing. It is something, though, whose time has come. Okay, and my last kind of warning to you, if you're like me and I Google, Laudato Si, oh my gosh, there's hundreds and thousands. I think last time I looked, there was like, if you just put Laudato Si, there's 13,000 hits on Google when you just put that in. So which one is good? Which one do you believe? Well, I'm a big believer in reading all the different viewpoints because that's the way that I form and inform my conscience. And it's the way I always love it when people say to me, did you read this? And I'll say yes. And I'll say, did you read this, which is the counterpoint? They'll go, absolutely not. So, well, then how can you support what you're saying and give me some reason to change my opinion if we haven't read the same things? What I show you up here, this is just off the USCCB website, okay? But I will tell you, start at the USCCB website, www.usccb.org. Start there, because that's going to be the authentic teaching of the church. And the blogs that they've posted and some of the other things are saying the things that the church teaches. I go and read, I don't know if you guys ever do this, but when I read something that's kind of challenging, I like to go through and read everybody's comments about it. And it always amazes me because it breaks down pretty quickly into he said, she said, and all that sort of stuff. The nice thing about these blogs are we know that these are ones that line up with especially Catholic social teaching. The other thing is it isn't pick and choose. Okay, so there are great Catholic scholars who disagree with major portions of this encyclical. Read them. You might find that you're going, yep, that's where I am. That's how I feel. But go ahead and read those, but don't make those the first part of your read. Read the stuff that comes from the church first, and then supplement as you go deeper and deeper. Stuff from our Sunday Visitor, USCCB, and a few places like that are ones that I can say you can read with confidence and feel very good about the fact that you are getting church teaching and what the church says. So I have a lot of people, my husband included, who said to me, why is the Pope getting into this political stuff? Why can't he stick to the religious stuff? And I had to kind of bite my tongue and say, well, first of all, when he wrote Laudato Si, he is not writing it as a scientist or a politician. He's writing it as a moral and spiritual guide for us. So understand what his job is. I tell people his job is to present us with the ideal. When you read this, Laudato Si, you're reading what the church says, this is the ideal. This is what we wish it could be like. This is what we want to see, and this is what we want to work toward. But it's not coming from a scientist on global warming. It's not coming from a politician on, if you're looking at unfettered capitalism. It's not coming from an interest group that's supporting or going against women's reproductive health. It's being written by somebody who's working to teach us moral and spiritual lessons. So keep in mind, it's just like when you read the Bible, who was the author, who was the audience, what was the reason it was being written? Same thing when you're reading these encyclicals. There are a lot of moral questions or concrete questions that the church has that they do, or that we read about, that the church doesn't offer a definitive thing. I get a phone call at least once a week from people that say, well, what is the church's stance on this? Well, the church does not take a stance on everything. That's important to know, that the church will take a stance on those things that they feel coincide or go totally against what the church is teaching and what's going on in our life right now. So while they might make a comment on something back in 1970 about what was going on with feminism and all that sort of thing, that might not be something that they're taking a lot of stance on legislation today on that, because they're meeting us where we are. And that's an important thing to remember, too. The other thing is that you have to remember that nowadays with technology, everything that's being said is being run through the media pipeline, okay? So you're getting the media's quick opinion immediately. I mean, we watched the Pope say what he was saying when he was here, and then the media immediately stopped and told you what the Pope just said. So keep in mind when you're looking at this who you're going to listen to. And again, nothing wrong with it. You got some people's opinions, and you might have went, I didn't really hear it that way, but something to think about. The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. The external deserts in our world are getting bigger and bigger because the internal deserts within us have become so vast. For this reason, ecological crisis is also a summons to interior conversion. And I say this because this encyclical is not primarily about public policy, as many people would have you believe. Instead, it's a summons to this profound interior conversion. When you read this, the number one reason to read it is not to go out and change the world. The first reason to read it is to begin to make that change internally in yourselves. And the Pope has said that. In fact, there was one little tiny line when he addressed the Congress where he pretty much told them they have to look at themselves and they have to decide where they stand on these issues and who they're representing. So just keeping that in mind. The other thing here is that we can't have a renewal of our relationship with nature unless we have a renewal with all of humanity itself. So not only is it an internal conversion, but it means that we have to get to the point where we can understand and tie and be comfortable with the fact that humanity and nature have an intrinsic common tie that can't be broken and can't be separated. That's really an important part of the encyclical. It says in here that Pope Francis wants us to answer the call to care for others and to care for God's creation. I've had so many people say to me, all of it is tree hugger stuff and all that. I said, wow, I don't think you've read it, because he spends a lot of time talking about caring for others and talking about the fact that if we care for our earth, that's going to allow us to take care of others. So they're intrinsically tied together. In linking respect for human life and dignity with care for the natural world, Pope Francis follows in the footsteps of both Benedict the 23rd and Saint John Paul II. Saint John Paul II said, respect for life and for the dignity of the human person extends also to the rest of creation, which is called to join man in praising God. He said that from his 1990 World Day of Peace. Again, none of this is really very new. Pope Francis really is asking a vital question to us. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us? That's a question that he's putting out here, and the whole encyclical is kind of based on that. Not just the world in nature, not just the world in people, but the whole world of people and nature together. His answer is a very wide vision, a big vision, where he says that we need one another, and that we have a shared responsibility for others in the world, and that being good and decent are worth it. They're worth it because we want to make sure that we're leaving a world that is at least as good and capable of sustaining itself as it is today to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and all those children around the world with whom we will never be intimately related, but to which their lives are all woven into the fabric of our lives. I think when he did this, his whole thing too was, I'm talking to everybody. Everybody's welcome to be a part of this dialogue and this discussion. So don't be afraid to talk about what kind of world do we want to leave for the people that come after us, to your Muslim friends and your Jewish friends and your Baptist friends and your non-denominational friends and even your friends who say there is no God. Okay, so there's no God. But what kind of world do you want to leave for the people that come after us? It's a big, inclusive question. There's a word that the Pope uses in this encyclical that I just want to make sure that you all hear at least once tonight. Integral ecology. The whole thing with integral ecology, whoops, I missed my paper here, is that it's the heart of the whole encyclical. Pope Francis says this: it's no longer enough to speak only of the integrity of ecosystems. We have to dare to speak of the integrity of human life, of the need to promote and unify all the great values. Once we lose our humility and become enthralled with the possibility of limitless mastery over everything, I'll say that again. When we lose our humility and become enthralled by limitless mastery over everything, we inevitably end up harming society and the environment. So what he's saying here is that integral ecology is the ecology of society and the ecology of nature, and that they both come together and they can't be separated. So we have about 25 minutes here to finish up. So what's this encyclical all about? It's one of those things when people say, hey, can you come and spend a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes of our thing telling us a little bit about Laudato Si? And I think I shared today with a couple people here earlier today, I said, you can do a whole semester in college on this encyclical. So when you walk out here today, don't think that we've even done anything but just glossed over the surface of this. The encyclical is broken down into, it has an introduction, has 6 specific chapters. The chapters are what's happening to our common home, the gospel of creation, the human roots of the ecological crisis, integral ecology, lines of approach and action, and ecological education and spirituality. He did a pretty good job, I think, of making sure that when people say, oh, it's all about global warming, it's like, really? Because that's not really what any of these chapters indicate. It's more than just media sound bites, okay? We keep hearing about that global warming. It's actually less than 3% of the document even talks about climate change. So, and if you Google it, I cannot tell you how many times it comes up. Laudato Si, an ecological, ecology primer. There's all this stuff, and of course, there's thousands of hits that talk about, it's all about global warming. And that's exactly what my husband said to me. What's with the Pope and global warming? Stick to religion. Well, I would tell you that it's less than 3%, but I'm also going to tell you why he addresses that in just a minute. The fact is that the document is most importantly about those who are living on the margins in our world today and how we are able to have them join our one human family. And we do that by looking at the fact that they are tied to the world the same way that we are. I'm going to give you a basic overview and some details. We'll go kind of fast. I'm happy to provide this information if people want the notes that I have on this. But I'm going to kind of go through and hit some things. Let's start with the one that makes me the happiest. This encyclical is about hope. The urgent challenge to protect our common homes includes a concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. I love the fact, and this is in paragraph 13. Almost at the very beginning of this encyclical, he talks about the fact we know things can change. And the whole idea is to bring everybody together and to look at sustainability. He goes on to say the Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes his loving plan or repents of having created us. Humanity still has the ability to work together and rebuild our common home. I don't know about you, but that I read that and went, great. If I didn't read the whole rest of the encyclical, man, he started out with this, not the world's coming to an end, but we have hope. We can, in fact, actually make this better than it is right now. The other thing is that the encyclical is about dialogue. How many of you watched any of the talks that he gave while he was here in the States? Most of you. Did you guys hear all the time, time after time, dialogue? When he spoke to Congress, I think he used the word dialogue 8 times and talked about dialogue 18 times. So I'm pretty sure that he really feels that dialogue, and it's why I spent a little bit of time at the beginning of this talking about it. He says, I told you I urgently appeal then for a new dialogue about how we're shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental change we're undergoing and its human roots, in other words, we're a part of that change, whether we're the complete and whole part. He wasn't talking about that. And in fact, he doesn't even go that far, but he says we are, in fact, at least a part, we have roots in the causes and that change. There are certain environmental issues which are not easy to achieve a broad consensus. I mean, I love the fact that he's real honest here. He doesn't say, hey, everybody is going to believe this is great. There are just certain things that people are not all going to feel real good about. Here I would state once more that the church does not presume to settle scientific questions or to replace politics. But I am concerned to encourage an honest and open debate, and I love the fact that he says debate, because there are times when he feels that we do have to step up and say, we do believe that this is the way. Things such as human dignity, not simple issues, but issues that we all know where the church stands on abortion. We know that because the church stood up and said, I will not be pushed aside. This is where we stand on this. So he does believe that we do have to have some good debate, open debate, so that particular interests or ideologies will not cause us to not be able to do what's best for the common good. So it's about dialogue. It's also about facing reality. I think it's kind of neat. He goes on in the 23rd paragraph to say, the climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all. It's really easy for us in our daily lives to think about ourselves. And one of the things as a youth minister that I would have the kids do is look at their footprint, their carbon footprint. Not because I thought that this was something that they were going to be able to change the world with, but I wanted them to open and see things broader. And that's what the Pope is saying in this encyclical. He says a very solid scientific consensus indicates that we're presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. He doesn't say, and I'm going to go back and say it, we see this global warming that's happening. He isn't saying, and it's all because of this, or this. He's not a scientist. He's a moral theologian. What he is saying is there's some things are getting warmer in places. There are some things that are happening. He feels, and again, this is not absolute church teaching. The Pope feels that he has enough scientific facts to draw some conclusions. And from those conclusions, he said, if the world is getting warmer and it's causing some issues, whether it's melting of the glaciers or super typhoons or droughts that are going on in places that they can't even come back from and farm anymore, or there's rain falling someplace, all these things that are happening, what he wants us to know is that the poor are the first ones that are affected and hardest hit by what's happening to the environment. So I love it when people say, and again, and my husband probably wouldn't appreciate that I've been using him as the example all night, but when he said, why is he doing this? And I said, his point wasn't global warming. His point was that the poor are the ones that are the first affected and most affected by the environmental degradation that's taking place. He also went on to say that humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and consumption in order to combat this environmental change that's taking place, or at the least, the human causes which produce or aggravate it. So, whether you think there's a hole in the ozone because of cows, or if you think there's a hole in the ozone because of cars, or if you think there's a hole in the ozone because it's cyclical and that just happens, doesn't matter. What he's saying is we do create and are a part of changes that take place on this planet, and we need to be aware of it and address it. Okay? I know this sounds like I'm like doing this, but I just every day I get these people saying, the Pope says this and all of this, and again, he's looking at us and saying, understand the moral implications. The encyclical, we talked about integral ecology. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis of justice, which is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. It's kind of nice the way he weaves those in, and he talks about dignity, and he talks about making sure that we're taking care of those living in poverty. But let's think about why and how they're existing in that poverty, and are we, through environmental things like taking down the rainforest, mountain topping, oil extraction, whatever it might be, are we contributing to the causes, the root causes of poverty? That's that whole idea of integral ecology. The encyclical is about the poor. This is kind of the middle or the meat of the whole thing. And when we look at this, the poorest areas and countries are less capable of adopting new models for reducing environmental impact because they lack the wherewithal to develop the necessary processes to cover their costs. They're too poor or too busy surviving to come up with the technological advances that might be necessary. The other side of this is that we in the developed world have had the ability to pollute a little bit in coming up with things that we're doing. We're looking at other ways, but it's whether you agree with anything else, you can't agree that we filled a lot of landfills. We've produced a lot of carbon-based things that are not good for our health and all that here in the United States. One of the things that China is arguing with is saying that we're doing the same thing the United States and Britain did and Australia did. We're doing that now. So you're telling us because you polluted things and you did all this that we can't develop our country the same way you did, and yet we don't have the means to use alternative ways of energy and things like that. So the developing countries have to stand back, and the Pope is very much part of that. If we have, the whole idea of to those to whom much is given, much is expected, he really believes that. He really wants you to know that we did a lot of polluting and we did a lot of things that the U.S., not just the U.S., okay, but the developed countries across the globe have done things that we are now telling developing countries, you can't do that. You have to use the expensive light bulbs. We can afford those, but you have to use them because we've learned from our mistakes. But we're trying to make those countries, those poor countries that are not able, they don't have the money or the wherewithal to do this. So one of the things when he talks about this is that what we're asking of these countries to take care of the environment, they're not able to do. So we have to stand up and we have to go, you know what? We helped cause a lot of this. So when people ask me, so we're going to spend money in another country to help them, it's like, yeah, because you know what? They had no say in what we did when we were developing as a country and developing our technology. The encyclical is about work, and I think this is kind of neat. It says, helping the poor financially must always be a provisional solution in the face of pressing needs. Provisional. Give a man a fish, teach a man to fish. So helping the poor is always something we have to do, but the broader objective should always be to allow them a dignified life through work. In order to continue providing employment, it's imperative to promote an economy which favors productive diversity and business creativity. I think what he's saying, I hope that I'm understanding what he's saying here, is that when he looks at this and we talk about, we want some kind of we want work that really satisfies us, work that gives us our lives meaning. Well, we can't say to those who are in developing countries who don't have the same skills we do and are barely eking out enough to feed their families, you know what? You're just lucky you have a job. I don't know about you, but I would hate being told that. And I'm lucky. I'm blessed. My family reminds me all the time, like, God, you get up every day and you love to go to work. You love your job. Well, the majority of the world that lives at or below the poverty level does not love their job. Some choose to live there, but the majority are simply eking out an existence. What happens is that we give them, and this is where that social ecology intersects with the natural ecology, that we have to look at an economy that allows people to make a living wage. And a lot of times we're talking about people in agrarian types of economies where they're farming. A large majority of the developing world makes its living in farming. So we have to make sure that farming, we're allowing them to make a living wage at doing that. And just because we might be able to do it on these big mega farms better, we can't take away that ability for them to farm and provide for themselves. Because I also don't know about you, but most people don't want to go up and say, I'd like to get my bag of help from you today in terms of some canned goods and maybe some help paying the power bill. Most people want to be able to provide that for themselves. So just keep in mind that the farmers around the world, we have to make sure that we are continuing to make sure that they are able to do that work and make a living wage. And part of that comes in with organizations like CRS, who are helping them with drought-resistant seeds and new ways of farming so that they can make a good living and so that they do get some meaning from the work that they're doing and not just surviving day to day. The encyclical is about the common good. If you've read the 7 tenets of Catholic social teaching, the common good is in there. Human ecology is inseparable from the notion of the common good. The sum of those conditions of social life, which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. Society as a whole, and the state in particular, and the state that we're talking about globally means the country, that the country is referred to as a state globally, are obliged to defend and promote the common good. So we can't just go out and cut down all those trees because we want really nice furniture. In some of those third world countries, they need those trees for charcoal so that they can cook their food each day. If we go through and take what we want because we can afford it, we're not looking at the common good of the whole planet. He also talks about the fact that the whole idea of the common good is not just people. We tend to think the common good of the people, but the common good of the planet. What we do here, most people have heard of the butterfly effect. What we do here, the butterfly's wings create a tsunami halfway around the world. Well, that in terms of both nature and socially, those little things we do here affect those all the way around the world. The encyclical is about, and I've mentioned this once already, our children and our grandchildren. And when he spoke to the families in Philadelphia, he made this point clear as could be. He said that once we start to think about the kind of world we're leaving to future generation, we'll look at things differently. That we realize that the world is a gift which we have freely received and must share with others. Since the world has been given to us, we can no longer view reality in a purely utilitarian way, in which efficiency and productivity are entirely geared to my individual benefit. Intergenerational solidarity is not optional, but rather a basic question of justice, since the world we received also belongs to those who do not yet inhabit the world. I think that's beautiful. And I think for most of us, I look around, I know there are a few of you here that have grandchildren already and all that. The fact of the matter is, I worry about I worry about my kids, let alone my grandkids, and what this world's going to be like for them when they're my age. So when I start thinking about that, then I start going, do I really need to drive a car that has, uses a lot of fuel or puts out a lot of emissions or anything like that? Oops, wrong direction. This encyclical challenges both the left and the right. It challenges everyone, and he made that very clear when he talked to Congress. So let's start with a few things. The encyclical challenges population control. There are a lot of people running around out there. Instead of resolving the problems of the poor and the thinking of how we could be different, some can only propose a reduction in birth rates. That's a big worldwide thing. Here in America, we haven't pushed that. But there, especially in Africa, where we were years ago, you've heard the graying of America, meaning that we're having fewer children, not that 2.2 that we said is necessary for the world to simply stay on an even keel. Well, there are a lot of areas in the world where we're saying if we want to reduce the amount of people on this world so that we can feed everybody and all that, then we need population control. So once again, there are these developing countries that said, wait a minute. You were allowed to have all the children you wanted while you were developing as a country, and now you're telling us we can't. And the church, we all know where the church stands on this. At times, developing countries face forms of international pressure which make economic assistance contingent upon certain policies of reproductive health. To blame population growth instead of extreme and selective consumerism on the part of some is a way of just refusing to face the issues. We don't have to tell somebody they can only have X number of kids. If we look at ways to be able to feed everybody, there is enough food on this earth to feed everybody on this earth today. We just have to figure out how to do it. It's also about human trafficking. At times, we see an obsession with denying any preeminence to the human person. There's more zeal being shown about beating the baby seals, about the lion that the dentist shot, than there is about the human trafficking that's taking place today. I was talking with somebody that over off of the coast of Africa, Zanzibar and Madagascar were both slave islands where slavery trading took place. And I explained to them that still today that's happening. And they went, no. I said, oh, yes, I've been there. And I can tell you that it looks pretty on the outside, and we've all seen the Madagascar movie and all of that, which makes it look all great. But that particular island has been doing what it's been doing almost from the dawn of time, and that is they are trafficking human beings. More zeal is shown in protecting other species than in defending the dignity with which all human beings share in equal measure. It's clearly inconsistent to combat trafficking in endangered species while remaining completely indifferent to human trafficking. How many times do we hear the little story on the news about, this bird that is on the endangered species list? We have to be careful because they're sending these parrots and all outside of the rainforest and all, and yet we're not talking about the kids from San Salvador and Honduras who are being trafficked because the gangs there have total access and freedom to do that. So this is part of what the encyclical is about. The encyclical is about the throwaway culture. Any living faith is challenging. Laudato Si challenges all of us to resist that throwaway culture. And the Pope used this, I think, if not in every one of his talks, in almost every one of his talks about the throwaway culture. And when we fail to acknowledge as part of reality the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities, and those are just a few examples, it becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. So if we can't give dignity to these people who are living on the margins, who are vulnerable, how are we going to even care about the vulnerability of the planet and nature? Since everything's interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is incompatible with the justification for abortion. I'll say it again because this is one of those things when, remember the whole thing about the right and the left? It's not right and it's not left. That's a challenge for both sides. That particular sentence said, since everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification for abortion. So whichever seat you sit on, right or left, that's a tough sentence to think about. The encyclical challenges uncontrolled capitalism, unfettered capitalism. I love this. This was said by Pope Francis in 2014. He says, I ask you to ensure that humanity is served by wealth and not ruled by it. What's very interesting to me about this is Catholic social teaching says that the economy must work for us. We must not work for the economy. So if the economy today, all this advance in technology is all about profit, okay? The Pope, you see there, he didn't say that wealth was wrong or bad or that we shouldn't accumulate wealth. His big issue with wealth accumulation and capitalism is, how are we making the profit? Are we making it on the backs of the poor? Who are we walking over? What part of the earth are we totally not worrying about? If we're going down and we want to raise cattle because we're a beef-loving nation and we're clearing wooded lands to make grazing pastures in South America because we want beef and we know that we make money off of it, but we're not paying any attention to the fact that we're shrinking the rainforest, and there's a point from which the rainforest will not be able to recover. So he's not, and I will tell you this because I am really kind of sick and tired of everybody talking about, oh, he's a socialist, he's against capitalism. He has never said he's against capitalism. The Catholic Church, go all the way back to 1890s, Rerum Novarum said that we do have the right to own private property. We do have the right to make money. What we have to be careful is how we make that wealth, how we accumulate that wealth. We cannot do it on the backs of the poor. So we need to reject this need for this magical thing that it's going to be capitalism that's going to save all this. It might be, but it has to be capitalism that understands, looks to, and embraces the fact that we cannot make the profit at the expense of people or the environment. Maybe a little bit easier to swallow and hear when we put it that way. We're almost finished because this is where we get into the encyclical when he says it's time to act. He doesn't just teach us all these lessons, but now he challenges us to put the teaching into effect, if you will. The encyclical calls for change in lifestyle and consumption. He says many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. It's kind of hard to ask a tree to bloom at a different time of the year or a crop to grow if it's too dry or too wet. But we as human beings can make changes in our lifestyle to offset some of those natural disasters that take place. When people become self-centered and self-enclosed, their greed increases. The emptier a person's heart is, the more he or she needs to buy, own, and consume. Remember that internal conversion? When that's not taking place, that's when we become obsessed with consuming and owning things. It becomes almost impossible to accept limits if your heart is empty, to live simpler. We're asked to live life more fully. This goes back to the very beginning of the encyclical when we said that it's an encyclical that starts with hope, because the Pope makes it very, very specific. He says, Christian spirituality proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of deep enjoyment, free of obsession and consumption. Doesn't mean you can't have nice things, but I struggle. In fact, we had a conversation with a detained immigrant yesterday. We were talking about what I had and what he had and how he really wanted what I had. And I was kind of like, wow, he crossed the border because he wanted what I have. I have way too much. I could have actually given him part of my stuff and still been okay. So I carry a Coach purse, and I tell people this all the time. It's like, I struggle with that, but I made sure that they were being paid a fair wage to do that. I also knew that it's leather, so it's natural resources, so it's not something that is all the plastic that they're going through. So, yeah, I justified my purchase. Unfortunately, I also justified the Michael Kors purse that I bought too. So we need to look at how can we simplify and how can we live life more fully. One of the ways we do that is by engaging with one another. Okay? That means not just our next door neighbor across the street, but our next door neighbor across the globe. If we're engaging, there's less need for stuff because we have one another. The encyclical does call for international action. This is the one part where the global warming really comes into to play here. It says we are called to work for effective response to climate change, one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. This will require honesty, courage, and responsibility, above all on the part of those countries which are more powerful and pollute the most. It's a tough one to swallow because guess what? He's pointing the finger right at us. Notice he didn't say that. He lets us draw that conclusion because most of us know we are that more powerful country. Reducing greenhouse gases requires honesty, courage, and responsibility on the part of those countries which are most powerful and pollute the most. That's really the line that a lot of people are having the problem with. So what you're telling me, Mr. Pope, is that America has to solve the rest of the world's problem on global warming. And that's not at all what he said. He simply says that those to whom much has been given, much is expected. For poor countries, the priorities must be to eliminate extreme poverty and to promote social development of their people. At the same time, they need to acknowledge the scandalous level of consumption in some of our privileged sectors of the population and to combat corruption. I love the fact that in the whole place where he's talking about all this, he brings in the fact that there's corruption, and not just in the rich countries, in the poor countries as well. So you don't get a pass just because you might be your country lives at or below the poverty level. We know that there's corruption in every state, every country. He also goes on to say that we're bound to develop less polluting forms of energy production, but to do so, we need the help of countries that have experienced great growth at the ongoing cost of prior pollution. We have the ability to come up with alternative forms, and the Pope challenges us. We need to do that. Not we, the United States, we, the countries that have the capability. We, the countries that have the capability. Well, we're going to finish up here. So the encyclical calls for political action and courage. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. The Pope realizes this is not going to happen next week, next month, next year. It might not even happen in this millennium. But he does want us to know that we have to take these responsibilities and all the costs that they entail, and politicians inevitably are going to clash with one another and with us. But we are called, as part of our faith, to participate in the political process. That doesn't mean that we get up and we say everybody needs to be Catholic. We get up and say, because I'm Catholic, this is what I believe, and let's talk about why it's important to you too. And the final thing here is our common home. This was at the beginning when I told you, in the words of his beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us, our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. This is our common home. I do have a prayer that I thought maybe we could finish with. What I'd like to is I have 3 pages, so maybe this table can do the first one, this table the second one, this table the third one. You guys can be with whichever table you would like. And then on the 4th page, we'll all finish up together. So this is a prayer to care for our common home. So we'll let this one start. Oh, can you see it? Okay. Father of all, creator and ruler of the universe, you entrusted your world to us as a gift. Help us to care for it and all people, that we may live in right relationship with you, with ourselves, with one another, and with creation. Christ our Lord, both divine and human, you lived among us and died for our sins. Help us to imitate your love for the human family by recognizing that we are all connected to our brothers and sisters around the world, to those in poverty impacted by environmental devastation, and to future generations. Holy Spirit, giver of wisdom and love, you breathe life in us and guide us. Help us to live according to your vision, stirring to action the hearts of all, individuals and families, communities of faith, and civil and political leaders. Triune God, help us to hear the cry of those in poverty and the cry of the earth, so that we may together care for our common home. Amen.